Hi gang, the Inquisition is one of the most singular and terrifying institutions in the Imperium. Dedicated to the investigation and countering of any threat, the agents of the Inquisition are one of the most learned, diverse, and specialized of the Imperium's forces. Armed with the authority to requisition anyone in the Imperium to their service, Inquisitors face demonic corruption, alien infiltration, and heretical cult uprisings on an almost daily basis, assisted by a dizzying array of specialists and warriors. But while the Inquisitors of the Ordos in theory have the ultimate in Imperial power, this is held in check by the web of Imperial politics, the dubious oversight of their fellow Inquisitors, and their own organization's many different factions. Look everyone, it's a magic space frog, the real originators of 40k. Details of how to get that and more at the end of the video. The Imperium of Man in Warhammer 40k is constantly in a state of peril. Alien invasions, chaos incursions, the armies of the Imperium are constantly engaged across 1,000 war fronts in the defense of the Emperor's realm. But the true threat to the Imperium comes as much from within as without. Corruption, heresy, deviancy, and recidivism are constant threats. The worlds of the Imperium riddled with alien influence, cults dedicated to dark gods, and straight-up rebels whose actions, if left unchecked, can spiral into vast new war fronts. And dedicated to fighting those threats from within is the Inquisition. The Inquisition is one of the most terrifying and powerful organizations within the broader Imperium. Granted total authority to act in whatever way they wish by ancient charter, the holy Ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition is a watchful eye on not only the common citizens of its worlds, but also the highest of its offices. Nobody in the Imperium is safe from the judgment of the Ordos, from the lowest sector administrator to the most powerful High Lord of Terror. The skilled people sworn to its service, the Inquisitors themselves, are lone operatives, warrior scholars, and secret agents, armed with the authority to command entire armies, requisition fleets, order assassinations, or sanction the exterminatus of planets. Every individual Inquisitor is empowered to investigate any possible threat to the future of humanity, whether that threat comes in the form of chaos corruption, alien incursion, or simply political inefficiency. There are no bounds to their jurisdiction. They can operate as infiltrating detectives hunting down the seeds of corruption and heresy in person, or as knowledgeable savants conducting research too sensitive or corrupting for lesser minds, or as crusading warriors leading forces into battle at the head of powerful warbands of specialist soldiers drawn from every part of the galaxy. Their reach is limitless and their power almost infinite, and every common citizen of the Imperium lives in fear of their watchful eye coming to rest on them. But as with any organization that powerful, the Inquisition is also fractured, broken down into a colossal number of ordos, conclaves, local cells, and philosophical factions that can often work against each other as much as they work together. For the Inquisitors of the Ordos, their work might be as political as it is practical. And this has been the case since they were first formed by one of the political masters of the early Imperium in the days following the Horus Heresy. Because of the nature of this subject matter, the history of the Inquisition is obviously shrouded in mystery, but by the consultation of multiple documents and by piecing together their salient points, it is, now, possible to piece together its origins. The Inquisition was created at the very end of the Horus Heresy by Malcador the Sigillite, apparently on the direct orders of the Emperor of Mankind. Malcador was the Regent of Terror, the right hand of the Emperor himself, a spy master and politician who was behind many of the early institutions of the Imperium, from the Assassinorum to the civilian government of the Council of Terror that would later turn into the Adeptus Terror. He was a perpetual, the Emperor's oldest ally, and a psyker of immense power, and throughout the Crusade and the Heresy, he operated a hand-picked private army of skilled operatives called the Chosen of Malcador. These men and women, joined during the heresy by individual Astartes that had been orphaned from their legions for various reasons, were dispatched throughout the galaxy at his command. They were special agents, knights errant who could rescue ancient artifacts before the fires of the Crusade consumed them, or whisk away promising individuals for interrogation or continued service. Malcador would eventually die in the final hours of the Siege of Terra, taking the Emperor's place on the Golden Throne while he fought Horus on the Vengeful Spirit. But before this, he gathered together 12 of his operatives, 8 Astartes warriors and 4 mortal humans, and he presented them to the Emperor as an insurance against the days to come. The 8 Astartes, their psychic powers individually awakened, would eventually go on to become the first Grand Masters of the Grey Knights chapter, stationed on Titan, which was hidden from the eyes of the Imperium for centuries, while that chapter built their strength, and their story will be told elsewhere. But the 4 mortals, individuals of character, skill, and determination, would be tasked with creating another new organization. An organization dedicated to investigating and unveiling threats to the Imperium from the alien, the mutant, and the heretic. The Orders of the Emperor's Inquisition. There are a few candidates in the records for exactly who these first 4 were. A number of people were prominent agents in the service of Malcador, but from later records it seems that the 4 consisted of Zaranchek Xanthus, one of the Chosen of Malcador, who was privy to some of the darkest secrets of the heresy, including contingency weapons in case of Horus's victory. Kyril Sinderman, the former primary iterator, that is propagandist, of the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, which was Horus's fleet. He'd escaped to Terra when the War Master turned traitor, and had then become a convert to the new faith of the Lectitio Divinitatis, the faith that worshipped the Emperor as a god. He took on a new name, Veritas. The third was Promius, originally the remembrancer Lemuel Gormon, a former businessman from Nordafric on Terra, who, as a remembrancer, was attached to the Thousand Suns Legion. After a series of events across the galaxy during the heresy, including being imprisoned by the Space Wolves and then hosting a shard of Magnus the Red within him, Promius was now a very powerful psyker. And then finally the fourth was Moriana, and there are a few different Morianas who are around at the end of the heresy. It gets a bit confusing, but the most likely is that this is Moriana Mauhausen, another prominent member of the Chosen. When the Senatorum Imperialis was convened on the first anniversary of the Emperor's ascension to the Golden Throne, the High Lords of Terra gathered. It said that a grim-faced man bearing the highest authority presented himself as the representative from the most holy orders of the Emperor's Inquisition, and since then the Inquisition in some form has been a watchful eye over the activities of the rest of the Imperium. Of course, behind the scenes, factions had started to develop. While 2 of the founders, Xanthus and Veritas, clove close to the Senatorum, developing this new role in the organization, the other 2, Moriana and Promius, were avowed resurrectionists. They believed that the immediate goal of the Inquisition should not be establishing government, but seeking ways to bring back the Emperor. This caused a rift within the original 4, with Promius and Moriana leaving the new organization and striking out on their own. In fact, much of the early organization of the Inquisition might have been developed by Xanthus and Veritas as a way of combating the efforts of the other 2. But soon after, those 2 split again. Promius, horrified by Moriana's willingness to investigate the darkest of sorceries in pursuit of a solution, and after a series of running battles, Moriana eventually vanished, and Promius rejoined the ranks of the Inquisition proper. At this point, the Inquisition was still heavily focused on the great archenemy of the Horus heresy, the powers of chaos. But by M32, a new threat would emerge during the War of the Beast, when vast orc forces, who had been left to grow in power after the heresy, united and eventually laid siege to Terra in a war that threatened to tear the newborn Imperium apart. The war eventually saw the formation of the Death Watch, an ad hoc organization of veteran Space Marines from different chapters that combined their skills to fight against the new Xenos threat. And near the end of the war, the Inquisition officially split its focus into two Ordos Majoris. The Ordo Malleus would continue, as the Inquisition had always done, researching and combating the forces of chaos, with their Chamber Militant, the forces under their command, being the Grey Knights, at this point very much still a secret. The Ordo Xenos, on the other hand, would concentrate on any alien threat, with their Chamber Militant being a ratified and formalized Death Watch, expanded and seeded across the galaxy. That situation continued for another 4 millennia until a third was added in M36, after the ruinous Age of Apostasy. In this period of Imperial history, the High Lord Gouge Vandire had seized control of the two most powerful offices in the Imperium, becoming Master of the Administratum and Ecclesiarch, and had then engaged in a paranoid reign of terror before being eventually deposed by the preacher Sebastian Thor. In the wake of that, the Adeptus Ministorum, the church, was banned by decree from having men under arms, and a new ordo, the Ordo Hereticus, was formed, partly to watch for signs of religious degradation and partly to watch over the church itself. The Ministorum responded to this loss of power by forming the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, exploiting a loophole in the wording so that they only held women under arms. While this was quite a controversial move at the time, it was permitted on the basis that the Adepta Sororitas would also serve as the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Hereticus, which made them another watchful eye over abuses of power by the church. And over that same 5 millennia of splitting, many more smaller ordos would be formed, each designed to combat very specific threats to the Imperium, and to support that, a whole structure would develop that allowed this colossal organization to function. However, at its core has always been the lone Inquisitor. In the Imperium of the 41st millennium, Inquisitors are still officially independent Imperial agents, individuals who investigate and prosecute threats against the Imperium as they see fit. Inquisitors can turn their attention towards anything they wish: alien plots, heretical cults, demonic incursions, laxity in the duty of those who are meant to serve the Imperium, even criminal enterprises. Any of those could be the focus of an Inquisitor's investigations. The mandate of the Inquisition is the survival of humanity, and so any threat can come under their jurisdiction. An Inquisitor's power is technically unlimited. An Inquisitor is granted the right to requisition any personnel or material they deem necessary to deal with a threat, from individual agents and soldiers seconded to their control for the duration of a mission, to vast battle fleets and armies that move at their command. Nobody in the Imperium is beyond service to the Inquisition. Entire worlds have been judged and convicted for their crimes by the servants of the Ordos. Planetary populations retasked because of some ancient crime or grand plan on the part of the Inquisitor. An Inquisitor, in theory, answers only to the authority of the God Emperor of mankind, and any power up to and including the exterminatus of entire planets is within their remit to call upon. However, given the nature of their work, the vast majority of Inquisitors and inquisitorial actions are on a much smaller scale. The movements of massive armies, the bombastic declaration of a system-wide purge, the open toppling of corrupt governments, all those are very public actions, and while those might have a purpose sometimes, it's much more likely that an Inquisitor's investigation, especially in the early stages, requires some level of secrecy. Inquisitors move within the shadows of the Imperium at large, often posing as other authorities or as agents, seeking out evidence of heresy or tracing heretical leads back to their roots. Inquisitors might present as bombastic generals and figures of awe, but it's more likely that they conduct themselves as somewhere between a detective and a secret agent, peeling back the layers of conspiracy, infiltrating heretical schemes, and nipping threats to the Imperium in the bud way before they grow to the scale where a battle fleet is necessary. Because of this, the Inquisition is seen as a clandestine and mysterious organization, and mystery and fear are essential tools for its operatives. To the lay citizen of the Imperium, an Inquisitor is a terrifying figure, an embodiment of the highest authority they can imagine, and the sight of an inquisitorial rosette, the traditional symbol of authority, is enough to induce bowel-loosening terror and a desperate need for them to confess their sins. Within the Imperium, tales of the Inquisition, when they're even spoken of at all, are synonymous with the disappearance of loved ones, the uncovering of horrific cults, or the arrival of war. And this fear is something the Inquisition encourages all the way up to the highest positions in the Imperium. But while that fear is justified, the authority of the Inquisition is unlimited, in reality, there are a lot of limits on what an Inquisitor can do. The obvious ones are, as we said, due to the nature of their investigations. An Inquisitor operating under disguise can't easily requisition an army to their cause. But even at the very highest levels, what an individual Inquisitor can do is limited by the resources available to them and by the politics of the Imperium and their own organization. An Inquisitor might well uncover a heretic cult that needs dealing with, and they might also requisition an army to do it, but where's that army coming from? What forces are available? Does that requisition require pulling an Astra Militarum force away from another war front, one that the army's commanders, or maybe other Inquisitors, consider to be a far greater priority? Will alerting those figures ahead of time risk exposing their investigation and warning the enemy? Who makes the call in those situations? An Inquisitor might well decide that, say, a Space Marine chapter is derelict in their duty and should be punished or even destroyed, but where will they amass the forces to do so, and at what cost? Will other Inquisitors disagree or consider the loss of life required to be wasteful? The Adeptus Mechanicus is technically under the auspices of the Inquisition, but woe betide any Inquisitor who assaults or trespasses on their realms without authorization. An Inquisitor is only human. To infiltrate a sovereign body of the Imperium, or to deploy to a battle alongside an army that resents and hates you, might not be the wisest move. In fact, these clashes can frequently bring Inquisitors into violent conflict, with many thousands of such agents active across the Imperium, all with their own investigations, priorities and theories, and all with ultimate and total authority. It's inevitable that they occasionally come to blows, and many Inquisitors have been dispatched by their rivals for threatening their own, of course, completely vital investigations. So while each Inquisitor is technically a free agent with total authority, the Inquisition has developed various layers of organization, ranks, and sub-departments to make sure its agents' work doesn't clash too often. At the highest levels, the Inquisition is represented by the Inquisitorial Representative to the Council of the High Lords of Terror. This isn't the leader of the Inquisition. The title of Inquisitorial Representative is more like the first amongst apparent equals, and at various points in the time, that job has been a long-term position held by a particularly politically savvy or prominent Inquisitor Lord, well known to the other High Lords, or it has been a rotating cast of different individuals, a different person appearing as representative whenever the Council of High Lords meets, selected by some obscure process within the halls of the Inquisitorial Fortress under Antarctica on Terra. Their position is less as a member of the government and more an advisor, informing the High Lords of emerging threats to the Imperium, as well as reminding the assembled worthies of the consequences of failure. The Inquisition doesn't need to court the High Lords for permission to act, but moving the great armies of the Imperium into action is certainly easier with them on side. Below that singular role, there's an obscure and secretive system of subdivisions, but the one that most Inquisitors will be familiar with is the Conclave. Conclaves are regional assemblies of local Inquisitors who watch over a particular area of space, usually controlled from an inquisitorial fortress on a prominent imperial world, and who collectively hold dominion over local military bases, safe houses, and some spacecraft for use by any of its members. Conclaves are ruled over by Inquisitor Lords, particularly well-regarded and experienced Inquisitors who hold the collective respect of the members. Bigger conclaves might have multiple Inquisitor lords, each representing the will and requirements of different Ordos, and they then command the loyalty of a number of independent roaming Inquisitors. Conclaves are functionally gatherings of peers. Individual Inquisitors might often bring leads or concerns to their local conclave in search of support or advice from those more experienced or who are in command of more forces than they are. But doing this is not without danger. Conclaves are political hotbeds full of Inquisitors with their own agendas from different Ordos or with different philosophies, and often an Inquisitor will quietly develop a lead themselves, only bringing it to the attention of their conclave if it becomes a much larger threat than originally anticipated. Conclaves might then respond by forming a cabal of Inquisitors, tasked with prosecuting that threat, usually Inquisitors with a particular specialism or interest in the threat at hand. In some less populated areas, conclaves and cabals might even be basically the same thing. Above and across those regional loyalties of conclaves lie the Imperium-wide loyalties of the Ordos. Ordos are broad divisions within the Inquisition, originally based on interest and now very formally arranged, each of which deals with a specific threat, and Inquisitors are free to join or leave a specific Ordo as they see fit. The three most well-known of the Ordos are the Ordos Majoris, the Ordo Malleus, the Ordo Hereticus, and the Ordo Xenos. The Ordo Malleus is the oldest. Known as the Demon Hunters, the Ordo Malleus comprises some of the most knowledgeable, incorruptible, and dangerous Inquisitors in the galaxy, all dedicated to fighting against the warp-born horrors of chaos and the eternal threat of the demon. The Ordo Malleus is the smallest of the three major Ordos, and in some ways the most closely knit, for their role requires the sharing of vast amounts of demonic lore. The Ordo's base is in their vast library complexes amid the rings of Saturn, defended by their own powerful fleets, where new additions to their ranks can train and build up their defenses against the warp. Given that their chosen role involves battling humanity's most terrible enemy, Ordo Malleus Inquisitors are frequently amongst the most martial of Inquisitors, often leading armies from the front, clad in heavy armor and wielding vast demon hammers inscribed with sacred wards and blessed sigils. The perils of the warp also tend to draw Inquisitors who have psychic talents into the Malleus, who might then strengthen their willpower in its training halls. The Ordo Malleus deals with a danger so terrible that even knowledge of it can be corrupting, and so the Order is not only one of the most secretive, but also one of the most brutal when it comes to suppressing its own actions. Since knowledge of the demonic can spread corruption, Malleus Inquisitors would often think nothing of exterminating whole settlements or scuttling whole craft, even executing their own conscripted forces in the wake of their successful campaigns, lest any rumour of the demonic spread. This also extends to the Ordo's Chamber Militant, the psychic space marines of the Grey Knights, also based on the moons of Saturn, a force so secret that other forces who fight alongside them are frequently mind-wiped, permanently seconded to inquisitorial service, or just executed. The Ordo Xenos has a rather different character. The threat of the alien is one that covers a huge variety of different species, all with their own particular dangers. From over-warlike Xenos, like the Orcs and the Tau, to the ever-present threat of infiltration by gene stealers or enslavers, to the prospect of ancient species such as Necrons lying undisturbed on Imperial worlds, Ordo Xenos Inquisitors must be alert to many different forms of danger. Many Inquisitors of the Xenos specialize in specific alien species, learning all they can in the hope of thwarting whatever plans that those species have, or providing the military forces of the Imperium with tools to use against them. Because of this, the Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos often have the demeanor of researchers or academics, or well-traveled explorers bedecked with the various artifacts, weapons, and even species they encounter on their travels. Xenos Inquisitors are often found in the company of rogue traders or other voidfarers, pursuing leads into lost or unexplored corners of the galaxy. And their dedicated Chamber Militant is one of the most widespread of all. The Death Watch are a Space Marine force formed in the aftermath of the War of the Beast, dedicated to combating the threat of the alien. Deathwatch watch fortresses take in Space Marines from many different chapters, all seconded to their service for years at a time, and combine them into kill teams at the disposal of the Ordo Xenos. The Deathwatch research ways to better counter alien threats, utilizing experimental technology to do so. That information is then spread amongst the Imperium's defenders. Marines returning to their chapters after their secondment bring with them valuable knowledge and tactics learned in the halls of the Deathwatch or adopted from the Battle Brothers they met, Battle Brothers who came from other chapters. And then finally, the Ordo Hereticus is the youngest and largest of the three major Ordos formed in the wake of the Age of Apostasy, and concerning itself with hunting down the heretic, the witch, and the traitor, the threats from within. Inquisitors of the Hereticus tend to be notoriously pious, with maybe more than a touch of paranoia, for their enemies are everywhere, lurking amidst every Imperial population. The Ordo Hereticus considers threats across countless fronts, and so the Inquisitors of the Ordo tend to be more concerned with the big picture than others. The purging of mutants by their warbands of flamer-armed zealots, or the hunting down of psychers, is often just the first step in uncovering the cause of such corruption. And Inquisitors of the Ordo have no qualms excommunicating nobles and governors, or issuing pogroms and purges against whole planets to stop new uprisings from occurring. While they're known as witch hunters, Hereticus Inquisitors often make use of their own sanctioned psychers in their work, or may be psychic themselves, and thus fully aware of the dangers the warp presents. Their warbands are often very large and zealous, composed of preachers, lay faithful, or even the more dangerous fringe sects of the Imperial faith, like redemptionists. Their relationship with the Church is often quite a strange one. Officially, one of the roles of the Hereticus is to police and watch over the Adeptus Ministorum for spiritual laxity and corruption, so that an event like the Age of Apostasy can never happen again. But in reality, many Inquisitors are individuals of such strong faith that they often find common cause with the confessors and cardinals of the ecclesiarchy, working alongside them against other factions of the Imperium. That is a similar role to their most common militant order, the Sisters of Battle. Officially, the Sisters of Battle are the standing army of the Adeptus Ministorum, sworn to the service of the Church. But during their founding, in the Convocation of Nephilim, oaths were sworn between the heads of the Sororitas and the First Masters of the Ordo Hereticus, a secret compact of aid, which means that while the Sisters of Battle are not officially a chamber militant of that Ordo, they're often all too happy to place themselves at the disposal of a pious Hereticus Inquisitor, and more than willing to turn on their masters in the Church if they suspect corruption or heresy. Below these three Ordos Majoris and their militant chambers are many more Ordos Minoris that concern themselves with more specialized threats to the Imperium, or are dedicated to watching over specific bits of the Imperium. For example, the Ordo Militarum concern themselves with the actions of the Astra Militarum, the Ordo Machinum, the same but for the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Ordo Sicarius were founded to monitor the Assassinorum, and the Ordo Astartes keep watch on the various Space Marine chapters as much as they're able for any signs of corruption. The Ordo Scriptorum keep a secretive eye on Imperial records and communiques, while the Ordo Scriptus oversees Imperial historical archives, and the Ordo Originatus are dedicated to researching those archives to uncover the true history of the Inquisition. Conversely, the Ordo Redactus are dedicated to obliterating any mention of the true origins of the Inquisition. Ordos Minoris might even form and disband as they become necessary. The Ordo Maledictum keeps watch on the spread of the Great Rift, whereas before its emergence, the Ordo Aegis was the organization dedicated to watching over the Cadian Gate, and the Ordo Sepulturum, one of the newest Ordos, was formed specifically to counter the threat of the zombie plague that emerged during the 13th Black Crusade. Finally, beyond the requirements of local conclaves and below such grand allegiances as membership of an Ordo, Inquisitors still might hold wildly different beliefs on the priorities of their organization and the best way to achieve the protection of the Imperium. These beliefs are often referred to as philosophies, or just factions, and they can be wildly diverse. An Amalathian Inquisitor, for example, might believe that the best way for the Inquisition to act is to reinforce and strengthen the Imperium's divinely ordained institutions so that they can do their job effectively, and anything that threatens the authority of those institutions is a threat to the stability of the Imperium. Their job should be to preserve the status quo. On the other hand, a recongregationist Inquisitor might argue that their job should be to constantly test those institutions, to force them to shake up and reappraise their own organizations to combat laxity and corruption, and may favor pushing or even strategically destabilizing them to force growth and change. We've talked about resurrectionists, and resurrectionist factions still exist in the Inquisition, who believe the most important goal should be the return of the Emperor, or the manifesting of his divine will, like the Thorians, who seek out what they call divine avatars, or the Ardentites, who look for signs of the Emperor's will being made manifest in humanity, so they can divine the best way of protecting his Imperium. There are many of these beliefs and philosophies, but broadly they are separated into two camps, those of the Puritan and the Radical. Puritan Inquisitors tend to believe in the accepted truths of the Imperial Creed that any Imperial citizen would recognize, that the Imperium as it stands is fundamentally correct, that its institutions should be upheld, and that any hint of deviancy or influence from its enemies is to be prosecuted without mercy. However, the path of the Inquisitor is a long and complicated one, and the people who walk it are exposed to far more of the truth of the universe than is usual for a human. Many Inquisitors discover ways in which they might better protect the Imperium by changing it, by reforming its institutions, by using ancient knowledge taken from cultures that predate humanity, or by co-opting and utilizing the tools of the enemy. These radical Inquisitors still fight to protect the Imperium. Their methods are just more flexible than their Puritan counterparts. A Puritan Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus might, rightly, burn any artifact tainted by the powers of the warp, seeing them as a dangerous and corrupting influence, while a radical might seek out forgotten and heretical texts, hoping to use their dark power to help them close a warp rift or counter a demonic incursion. They might take up demonic weapons or create demon hosts, all the better to fight against the servants of chaos, even if their Puritan counterparts would accuse them of heresy for doing so. A Puritan Xenos Inquisitor might prosecute campaigns of extermination against alien enclaves using their specialist knowledge to inform the purges of the Death Watch, whereas a Radical might seek to learn from those Xenos, searching for established ways to combat a more dangerous threat, making use of ancient Xenos artifacts, or even including xenoforms in their warbands. There are a massive number of Puritan and Radical philosophies amongst the Inquisition, with a diversity of opinion over the correct way to carry out their duty, and most of those divisions exist without too much in the way of violence, but sometimes a particular faction carry their beliefs too far, delve too deep into heretical knowledge, and it's not unknown for Inquisitors, or even whole factions, to be declared excommunicate traitorous by the grand conclaves of the Inquisition and then purged by their peers. Of course, while we tend to talk about Inquisitors as individuals, in reality, no Inquisitor goes about their duty totally alone. It's usual for Inquisitors to be accompanied in their investigations by a number of acolytes, assistants, specialists, bodyguards, and trainees that form a retinue. For newer Inquisitors, these retinues can be quite small. A trusted warrior or two, a savant or sage, a sanctioned psyker for following the trail of their enemies, maybe a pilot or navigator for their personal craft, or servitors with various roles. Many Inquisitors include within their retinue an interrogator, an Inquisitor in training, often the most prominent of their acolytes and one who's shown the most promise as a potential servant of the Ordos. But as the Inquisitor rises in power and influence, their retinue might become like a small army in itself. Warriors drawn from all cultures and arms of the Imperium, from skilled veteran guardsmen down to brutal gang fighters recruited from the depths of hive cities, or death cultists from the many primitive worlds of the Imperium. They might be accompanied by representatives from other branches of the Imperium, such as astropaths, or tech priests of the Mechanicus, sworn to their service, specialist investigators seconded from the ranks of the Adeptus Arbites, whole offices of scribes and researchers to track their operations, and a small group of interrogators, explicators, and other assistants that lead smaller warbands on the Inquisitor's behalf, following multiple leads at once across a system. Inquisitors have been known to found whole schools or training facilities just to provide them with the specialists they require. And outside that trusted network of servants, many Inquisitors cultivate vast networks of informants, lesser contacts who can keep watch for any interesting leads. When combat's required, an Inquisitor's retinue is often capable of handling that threat directly, the Inquisitor and their most skilled acolytes forming a warband that's more than capable of taking on cult gatherings or small-scale criminal enterprises. But when a larger attack's required, an Inquisitor can then call on significant military resources. The Inquisition maintains good relations with the Militarum Tempestus, and its scions are often the first forces requisitioned by an Inquisitor when military expertise is required. Many famed scion regiments have long and storied histories of inquisitorial service. In fact, many conclaves raise and maintain their own dedicated regiments of inquisitorial stormtroopers that are permanently seconded to the Inquisition and barracked in their fortresses, either whole regiments raised from scratch for that purpose, or forces of grim-faced veterans drawn from a dozen different security forces, equipped with their own transports, orbital insertion craft, and support staff. Larger conclaves and Ordos maintain fleets of inquisitorial cruisers and warships, and even larger numbers of small shuttles, gun cutters and gunships, many of which serve as their Inquisitors' bases of operations on extended deployments, and are equipped with their own sworn navigators, astropaths, and warp capability. All of those are readily available forces, the sort of thing that any Inquisitor could command with relatively little preparation, only the agreement of his conclave. But beyond that, the Inquisition can then requisition anything from local PDF regiments or Arbites patrols to full-scale armies or battle fleets, should the threat be deemed large enough by their fellow Inquisitors. By its very nature, the Inquisition is one of the most varied and diverse organizations within the Imperium. Its remit is nothing less than the preservation of the Imperium and mankind from any threat that can be imagined, and the myriad conclaves, cabals, chambers, ordos, and philosophical factions, the very independence of the Inquisitors themselves, is a way of ensuring that the organization always has some method of countering an enemy. That method might involve infiltration or assassination conducted by an Inquisitor and their crack team of specialists, or it might be a sector-wide crusade enacted at the will of the High Lords by the entire armed might of the Imperium, and where the Inquisition serves as merely the catalyst, a source of specialist knowledge, an early warning system, or the watchers over its prosecution. Inquisitors are simultaneously the highest authority in the Imperium, a terrifying reminder of the reach of its government and the insignificance of its citizens, but also the Imperial agents most likely to be lurking among them, dealing with threats far closer to home than a planet-wide war zone. Inquisitors could be roving secret agents, dedicated researchers, bombastic demagogues, or seasoned judges, or all of those in the course of one career. And that's what makes them so useful in the setting. Within the game, Inquisitors are this handy way of introducing characters that can fulfill a number of roles that aren't within a massive all-consuming army, roles that work really well for point of view. Inquisitors often operate as basically detectives, which makes them useful as protagonists, because they also have to figure out the mystery of whatever they're investigating, just as the reader is figuring out the mystery of Warhammer 40,000. But at the same time, this is 40k, so the person cast as the most outwardly relatable, the one we might most easily recognize if we're getting into 40k, is also the one with the most horrific powers. The Inquisition is a symbol of how little the Imperium cares for the regular human, and how far its end justify the means beliefs can be taken. So Inquisitors end up as this simultaneous way into the setting, method to introduce the lives of the people behind the battlefront, and also a representation of the absolute worst tendencies of the Imperium, which makes them very good antagonists as well. There's a reason why so many novels are written about Inquisitors. They allow someone a believable way into the setting we all love, while still being appropriately horrible for 40k. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to hear more about factions of the 41st millennium, stay tuned, there should be a little video popping up on the right there. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can like and subscribe. You can also follow the second channel, Arbitarian's Precinct House, where all of the book club and Tale of Four Gamers gaming videos will be happening. And of course, you can visit the merch store and buy a silly t-shirt. See ya!